Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to this evening's discussion on Talking Films Online. Talking Films Online, or TFO in short, is an informal coming together of academics, students, researchers, filmmakers, and cinephiles interested in cinema, more importantly, interested in talking and writing about cinema. The online group came together quite spontaneously during the pandemic and lockdown in June 2020. Geeta Vishwanath from Baroda and Nikhila, that's me from Hyderabad, have been coordinating the activities of TFO since its inception, with people like Sanjay Kumar, Sridhar Modugu, K. Paniraj, Ajanta Sarkar, Murli Krishna, Tarakeshwar VB, Yagnashri, Rasha, Madhurima, Pradnya, Asmita, Vijay Kumar Borati, and many others. You can see a whole host of names who join the weekly discussions and enhance the quality of the discussion. So far, TFO has organized 233 weekly online discussions. In fact, this is the 234th one, which include weekly discussions on a pre-decided film, such as this one, besides a few month-long film festivals and discussions. For instance, last September, TFO had organized a Kannada movie month where filmmakers Prithvi Konanur, Srinidhi Bengaluru, and screenplay writer Ananta Shandreya joined the discussion. We'll have an exciting announcement of another film festival soon. Samvarta is here, so very soon we'll announce another film festival for May. Filmmakers often make available their films exclusively for TFO members to watch, often by generously sharing links to their films. And we've had both first-time filmmakers such as Bani Singh and Kling Johnson, as well as well-known auteurs such as Deepa Dhanraj, Jayant Cherian, Girish Kasarvalli, Adur Gopal Krishnan, Aparna Sen, Anjali Montero, and KP Jaishankar, etc., join the discussion of their respective films. Geeta and I have also documented this weekly activity of TFO as an article titled Cinephilia to Creating a Living Archive of Film Discussions in the book Politics of Curatorship, Collective and Effective Interventions, edited by Monia Acchiari and Philip Rencius, which was published in 2023. During June every year, to mark TFO's anniversary, we organize the smartphone short film competition for students between 18 to 25 years of age, and the winners are awarded prizes. On September 30th and October 1st last year, TFO organized the first international seminar on Indian cinema in the digital era, continuities and discontinuities, in collaboration with Forum on Contemporary Theory, Baroda. The aim of TFO is to get a conversation going around cinema and to get as many people involved in the process as possible. With the weekly events being online, anyone and everyone interested in cinema is welcome to TFO. TFO has a WordPress blog where all kinds of writings on cinema are encouraged. TFO's YouTube channel is called Talking Films Online, and that's where we are going live. You can also watch recorded discussions on the channel. TFO has a private group on Facebook, and there's also a WhatsApp group, and now a new Instagram page where posters with the film links for discussion and the Zoom links are posted. Rangeela, this week's film was a suggestion that actually came from Samvartha a couple of months ago. He also put me in touch with Pallavi Rao, who will initiate the discussion on the film today. Pallavi Rao is currently an assistant professor in media studies at the University of Virginia, Charlottesville, and received her PhD in media studies from Indiana University in 2021. Her primary research areas are anti-caste and feminist media studies, with a focus on political economy and business histories of Indian media, with an abiding fascination and interest in popular Hindi cinema. She has published her work on caste and patriarchy, popular Hindi film, and India's digital media and entertainment culture in several journals, and currently teaches undergraduate courses on the business of media, creative labor, film and television studies, food media, and the digital media economy. She has a professional master's degree in writing and communication, and also has also worked as a lecturer in media writing and social theories at Manipal University. A very warm Pallavi, and it's now over to you. Very happy to have you on TFO platform. It's now over to you.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. And thank you all for being here. This is more people than I honestly thought would attend, because my experience with a lot of reading groups and film viewing groups is that attendance can be very sketchy. So I'm very grateful and excited that there are familiar faces here, former students here, former teachers. I'm going to call Faniraj sir a former teacher of mine, who was here and is still here. I think, yeah, I see his face still. His name is still here. And in many ways, really talking about Rangeela, which as you mentioned, Samvarta has put you in touch with me, because I have spoken intermittently, fragmentedly, in many ways over many years about this film to him, and my particular relationship with femininity that this film represents. I am going to share my screen, because I feel like when I talk about images in Rangeela, it really helps to see what I mean when I'm saying, Urmila's face or Urmila's body and things like that. This film turns 30 years old this year. It was released in 1995, and I was 11 years old when it released. So in many ways, it came at a very key point in my life, at the cusp of adolescence, I think. And for that reason, it remains very close to my heart in terms of how I began viewing women on screen. Popular film was my primary sort of entry point into women in media, and Hindi film stars were often, how many of us in India encounter the sort of the really blunt realities and fantasies of the female body and the female gaze. In how we can view ourselves as women. I want to draw attention to the graphics of the words female stardom here. That is a graphic that has taken the most time to produce on this PowerPoint, because I was also trying to make it very Rangeela or colorful, and I want that hard work to be noticed. But most of these are collections of images from the film that I hope are both familiar, but that I hope to also make a little bit unfamiliar, or refamiliarize you with as I'm talking about it. Rangeela launched Urmila Matondkar, the central character, the actor playing the central character in this film, into stardom. It is arguably the biggest hit of her career. And my interest in this film is particularly twofold. One is that it's one of the rare early 1990s film centered around a female character, not just as a romantic object. And I would argue, in fact, the romance is secondary here. It's more focused on her pursuing her dream career of being a Hindi film star. And that's unusual in and of itself, I will say. But also the film is itself a meta commentary on star making and star making processes of cinema, and the the feminine body as a spectacle, right? And so it's offering different ways of reading the female body on screen that I particularly find very fascinating. And I can say that many of the things that I'm going to say about this film and about Urmila Matondkar are not restricted only to this film and to this actor. I think many people will have different films that they encounter similar ideas in. But for me, this film, when I think about the 1990s, this is the quintessential 1990s film. And it is wrapped up both in the cultural moment it was produced in the actors who come to define a kind of 1990s modernity, urban modernity, and particularly specific to Bombay, I think. And of course, of a particular song and dance spectacle that was particular to the 90s film that I think has faded from our memory right now. So I'm actually going to go into PowerPoint mode. And so I am interested in the phenomenon of female stardom particularly, because Hindi cinema, like a lot of popular cinema industries, tends to be male dominated and centers a lot of male-led storytelling. Even the directors are predominantly male, and Rangeela's director is, of course, Ram Gopal Verma, himself very much a man sort of fascinated by the larger-than-life female stardom of Urmila, I will say, and is central to also producing it. And in this sense, I'm very interested in what the film does in terms of the spectatorial gaze, because I do think the audience is being taught to also see women in particular ways when newer forms of female stardom emerge, or when there are competing kinds of female stardom, and you can compare Urmila to other stars of that era. I'm of course borrowing, ideas of stardom here from Richard Dyer's work. He's a film scholar who's written extensively on Hollywood stars, and was central to sort of thinking about a theory around stars. This quote where he says that stars are themselves involved in turning themselves into commodities. They are both labor and the thing that labor produces, but they do not produce themselves alone. And so I'm interested here in the film star as the construction of several institutions in the film industry, how they get made into commodities, how they're both an economic tool, right, advancing film production in terms of their net worth and their value, but they're also an object of consumption by their fans in various ways. Many of those earlier forms of merchandising around, star commodities, like, the film poster or the audio cassette or the DVD, these are, and the film magazines as well. These have sort of started losing their relevance in the social media age. But I will argue that the star image itself is still a very sort of significant commodity that now gets traded online, right? There are modes of visual and mediated exchange online that make it still a very sort of cachet and currency in terms of how stars are producing images about themselves and their characters and the blurring of those lines. And of course, Dyer is very interested in that, the paradox of the star as being both extremely ordinary but also extraordinary, and the ways in which their actual life and their screen biography have tended to overlap and blur. Many a time when we talk about people like Amitabh Bachchan or Shah Rukh Khan, there's no separating the filmic image from who they then come to be in real life, insofar as what we can understand and know about their real life remains limited. And I'm also very interested in the materiality of the star, right? Of the star image in particular, thinking about the body, the size of the body, the shape of the body, their hair, their voice, the gestural repertoires that they have when they move or dance or fight on screen, the costumes that they wear, a certain tone and style in the ways in which they present themselves. These are all, also commodified in various ways when you think of, for instance, how much mimicry is an art form in India when it comes to paying respect to a star and so on. I'm also interested in what the Indian film scholar Vijay Mishra in Temples of Desire says, that song and dialogic situations are particularly important in constructing the Bombay film star, because dialogue also circulates as a kind of meme now, as much as the song and dance spectacles themselves do. So stardom is a very important element of the Hindi film industry, and I think understanding how and why film stars are both important economically, but the sort of cultural effects and affect that they produce, I think, is very interesting to unravel when we think about films like Rangeela. But I'm also particularly interested in female stardom, and there has been much more recent work in situating who the female star is in Hindi cinema and how we can perhaps see her as playing particular, roles, both culturally and socially, but also within the production of her own image. The scholar Usha Iyer has written about a number of female stars in her book Dancing Women, from the 50s and 60s onwards: Nargis and Vaijayantimala, Hema Malini, Meena Kumari, and then on to the later periods. But I'm very interested in how she writes about Madhuri Dixit's stardom, which to me has some parallels with Urmila Matondkar in Rangeela. What Usha Iyer says about Madhuri Dixit in the late 80s to the early 90s is that she is the architect as well as the product of a historical moment when film dance becomes critical in the construction of female stardom. And so dance is the central element here that is important in how a female star is produced on screen. And together, the dancing heroine and the choreographer for Ek Do Teen, which was Saroj Khan, conceptualized a new female movement vocabulary in popular Hindi cinema. Madhuri Dixit is particularly important also because Usha Iyer points out that she was a key figure who dissolved the heroine and vamp binary, which was very sort of typical of a certain kind of Hindi film narrative throughout the 70s. The idea even of the dancing woman, often a courtesan or a sex worker kind of figure, whose dance is then a professional obligation. And so is somehow doing it reluctantly was a key part of the plot. Madhuri really plays with, disrupts, confuses that, right? In roles where her dancing is a fraught professional obligation. These are three such films. The top one, Ek Do Teen, is from Tezab, where her father is literally forcing her to dance for a living and then exploiting her for money. In Anjam and in Yarana as well. Very interesting to think about how dancing is woven into the storyline as a justification to have Madhuri dance on screen. But it's also then, playing with ideas of morality, right? The good woman does not willingly dance, but a good woman who's forced into a situation has no option but to dance. And so there's a tension here in Madhuri Dixit's star text between displaying and containing the female dancing body. She is both enjoying the publicness of her dancing abilities and the appreciation of that, but at the same time, her morality can be recuperated through the script suggesting that she's somewhat forced or that she's not really fully, inhabiting the stage with this sort of inviting the male gaze in this very spectacular ways. And I think that this tension really enables her to both exceed the narrative repression here, which is that moral gaze, and emerge as an active communicating subject. And I do think what Usha Iyer calls the production number, which is all of these songs often set on a stage to a live audience with people clapping and watching her, right? That's a part of this. As well as this idea that it has its own unique dance moves, and Saroj Khan is central to that, right? The Madhuri Dixit move that then becomes replicable by several fans in real life scenarios that we've seen. A lot of this can also, of course, be associated with how Laura Mulvey's very central essay on, visual pleasures and narrative cinema talks about the traditional role that women play on screen, that they are simultaneously looked at and displayed, and that they connote a certain to be looked at-ness, right? Women exist on screen to be looked at, and their entire presence is filtered through this idea that they attract the male gaze, and looking at the female star is meant to be a source of great pleasure. And there is a very feminist overtone here, which is that in many ways that the woman becomes the vehicle only of male desire, and that, she's in many ways just a recipient of the male gaze, which is the central argument of that essay. Usha Iyer actually pushes back against this a little bit, where she says that the very act of dancing complicates Mulvey's argument about passive and fetishized showgirls. And she instead says, she quotes someone else called Monica Mehta, who says that we have to also pay attention to the female body's ability to speak through gesture and movement. So even though in these images, you can see Madhuri is clearly enjoying being on stage, the dance is pleasurable as a vocation for her, and that even though this might be a character within the film who is coerced or pressured into dancing for the public, there are great forms of pleasure available for the performer herself. And that these then basically mean that these are complicated ways of to be looked at-ness, right? Because the woman is inviting herself, inviting the gaze that looks at her as much as she is also looking back, I would argue, at the spectator. Madhuri very often, in fact, was known for looking at the camera with this characteristic smile and coyness, right? So there's an exchange of power here rather than a very one-dimensional male gaze, is what Usha Iyer says about the female star. To me, all of these are also extremely emblematic in Urmila Matondkar's particular role in Rangeela, even as she does this in other films, and how it embodies the female star text for the mid-1990s. The 90s are still very much Madhuri's era. I would argue that she remains the dominant female star of that era. But for me, Urmila in many ways is very distinctly similar and also different from Madhuri. In one of the interesting things to note here is that Saroj Khan is the choreographer also for Rangeela. So I think it's very important to sort of attribute a co-authorship, if you will, of the female star text of the 90s, right? She's very important in how the female star dances and occupies screen space in the 1990s films. And Urmila is certainly one of her more famous exponents alongside Madhuri. Like Madhuri Dixit's other films, this film also sees Urmila or Millie, the character that she plays, as dancing through a professional obligation. She starts off as a backup dancer in a Hindi film and then ends up becoming a headlining star. But I would argue that this film lacks that moralizing tension that Madhuri's characters seem to have had in her films. There is no disrespectability associated with dancing or being in the public. In fact, the film opens with Yaire, the song that is in that fourth GIF in the corner right. And it's literally her dancing on the streets, inviting everybody to join her. And the entire mood and tone and semantic sort of spectrum here is one of joy, of reveling in your body in the public, that is able to dance and take up space in particular ways. In this, I also think what is interesting is that there is no stage as such. Madhuri Dixit very much was a stage performer in these films that she was playing the roles of. Um, but in this film, the stage is replaced with both a diegetic camera, right? The camera that is shooting a film of Millie, the character, as well as the Ram Gopal Verma's camera, right? So there are two cameras going on here, and Millie is often oriented to facing the camera. She is the focus of both cameras, but especially she's often breaking the fourth wall and looking at the spectator directly in ways that Madhuri also did. I also want to talk a little bit about costuming here because in many ways what stands out for me in Rangeela is Millie is not a traditional Indian woman. She inhabits a certain kind of 1990s modern Indian woman that to me is really interesting and exciting, I think, when I was 11 years old to view, because most of the dance in this film tends to be of a Western dancing repertoire. Hai Rama might be the only song that has some classical elements to it, but mostly the costume and styling, right? The use of denim, the mini skirts, the swimsuits, the emergence of the Manish Malhotra chiffon sari in the song Pyar Ye Jaane Kaisa Hai. These are all sorts of mostly emblems of the modern Indian woman in Indian cinema of the 1990s, and barely a hint or mention of any traditional aesthetic is pulled into this, right? Even though there's a performance of that in some songs and some moments, it's not really central to Millie as a character. And I will say what's also interesting here is Millie does not answer to anyone in the film. She doesn't need her parents' permission to be in cinema. She does not have a social setup that is repressing her or stopping her from doing so. She is in many ways embodying what a modern 90s woman could be imagined as at that time. Even though, of course, real life is more complicated than that. I will also point out that Millie is actually a Brahmin character in this text, right? I think the last time I watched this a couple of years ago was the first time I actually kind of really tried to find out what is her caste location. And Wikipedia told me it's Joshi, so she is a Brahmin. But the Brahminness is a very sort of minimalist subtext here. It's a minor plot point. I don't think anyone is explicitly referred to as Joshi ji or anything, so they're not trying to spotlight it in any way or even accidentally reveal it, I think. Ram Gopal Verma is not interested in it, I would say, in some ways. But it is worth noting that as someone in the film industry, she's never considered disrespectable, right? And women in the film industry in particular, women dancers, often carried that baggage. And in this film, which has a particularly, I would say, non-cynical, very rosy-eyed view of the film industry, she is fully sort of comfortable in her respectability. She's a fully conscious agent. She exercises her own choices, and she's not rendered disreputable for doing so. There is no judgment directed at her by almost anyone in her life, and in fact, everyone is excited by the possibility of her success. So I think in some ways, the ways in which the modernity of the urban Indian woman gets filtered through Millie's body, I think, is interesting to see. I will say this brings me back again to Malvi because the obvious critique to make of Urmila's image in this film is that she remains an erotic object for the characters within the screen story and is thus also produced as an erotic object for the spectator within the auditorium, even though arguably she does not explicitly direct her erotic gaze in the film towards either male actor. I do think what's interesting here is that the gaze of the spectator, us as the audience, and the gaze of the male characters in this film are very neatly combined. We are made to engage with Millie as the actors in the film obviously are. And this brings me to sort of the real joy of Rangeela is how it celebrates the pleasure of looking, right? It's very much a film celebrating what psychoanalytic film critics call scopophilia, the pleasure of looking. And the film is explicitly indulging in that pleasure several times and acknowledging it. These are three screen grabs from the film, but Amir Khan's character Munna often is looking at Millie both as the object of his romantic interest, but also in the making of the star. And this screen grab is from the opening moments of Mangta Hai Kya, where he just is, struck by seeing her on stage in a silhouette doing some dancing. Jackie Shroff's entire character, I would argue, exists to just look at Millie. And in fact, in Tanha Tanha, I think the whole time he's off in the side, somewhere on the side, just gazing at her while she does the hook step and is like, the central focus of the camera. She occupies the frame very centrally in that song. And he is, in many ways, I think, meant to be a reflection of what the audience is experiencing in watching Urmila, which is just, again, being completely starstruck and gazing at her in admiration, lust, love, all of those mingled together, right? The third case is, of course, of Gulshan Grover's character, Stephen Kapoor, the Hollywood aspirant who wants to make Spielberg-like cinema, but is shooting a female-led star film in Bollywood. And of course, his camera is the diegetic camera within the film through which Millie gets to enact, Urmila gets to enact Millie's dance moves, right? Right. And so this is, I think, a very important element here that reveals the transparency, right, of the star making process. The film is very aware that the star is manufactured, that the star is a repository of meanings, and that multiple people are working to produce her image in particular ways. And Stephen Kapoor is the sort of means to that end. And I think that's very important. And there's, of course, us, the audience, right? We are both watching Millie ourselves, Urmila Matondkar as Millie ourselves, and our gaze is directed at her as well. But we are also watching all these other men looking at her. And I think that there's something that the film is explicitly acknowledging, that the joy of cinema, the pleasure of cinema, almost a libidinal pleasure, is really in the act of looking. There are many theories of psychoanalysis, Freudian and Lacanian, about the importance of sight and seeing and looking in everyday practice, right? There are power games here at play. The ways in which we can look and gain pleasure from it often symbolize an appropriative sort of element, right, to the job of the gaze. And they're not irrelevant, but I think Ram Gopal Verma is less perhaps interested in the power dynamics here. He is much more about the affect of looking and the ways in which looking brings us a certain pleasure. And I can't forget the key author who is doing all of this looking, of course, is Ram Gopal Verma himself, right? Urmila is both the object of his fascination and is scripting her then as the object of many other people's fascination in the film. So I think this film is a love letter to the act of looking and how much pleasure cinema brings us in the act of gazing upon beautiful bodies on screen. But of course, in this film, it is a female body and female stardom. And I think to validate her worth as both an object of the gaze, it is very, very important for Ram Gopal Verma to sort of set up. And so Millie is this, very vexing combination of girlishness meets womanliness. She's sometimes in braids, acting very girlish. With Munna, her dynamic is often very childlike, I would argue, for most of the film. And then with Kamalji, it's very much like an ingenue, kind of looking up to a mentor-like figure. And then on screen, she's, of course, a woman fully aware and conscious of her body and the ways in which it can project, beauty and like the spectacle across our screens. And so there is a real sort of awareness here in her stardom, both from herself, but also by the characters played by these men. And I would argue two things here about the men in particular. What Munna serves as a character, right, is a representation of the public encountering the female star, right? At an early point in the film, in fact, he has this line, "Apun public hai public, jisme apna paisa vasool nahi, uska dabba gul," which is like, the public has a certain power, right, over the making and the unmaking of a star. In this case, he is referring to Rajkamal, who he's trying to criticize. But I think the film is also saying then in many ways that Munna is representative of the common man, because he's also a a tapori in Bombay. And he sells tickets in black, so he's a tapori and a spectator of sorts. And he is a representation of what the common man is going to encounter in Urmila's image on screen, I think. I think that is interesting in and of itself. The other male gaze here through which, Millie's stardom gets reflected is, of course, Rajkamal. And at one point, when she and Rajkamal are talking, she asks him, "Aapko kaisa lagta hai? How do you feel when everyone's lining up for your autograph and wants to look at you?" And he just says, everyone likes the Kamal that they see on screen. जब मुझे मालूम है कि वो लोग उस कमल को पसंद करते हैं जो पर्दे पे 20 लोगों को डिशुम डिशुम करता है, जो झाड़ के आसपास गाना गाते हुए चक्कर मारता है। लेकिन उस कमल को कोई नहीं जानता जो इस कमल से लेके उस कमल तक पहुंचने के लिए कितने चक्कर काटे हैं. So he's kind of revealing here that there is a star making process for the male star as well, right? And that that stars are often made and constructed, but there's a lot of chakkar katna, right? There's a lot of work to it, the dishum dishum and the gana gate hue, right? Like the song and dance ritual here, beating up people on screen, and the fact that the audience or the spectator remains unfamiliar with the male star's difficulties or struggles, or let's just say journey even, right, is unaware of the making of the male star. And I think there's something interesting in the idea that stars are somehow still opaque to the audience. I would argue that today this is not the case, but in 90 cinemas, certainly. Right after this, she asks him, how did you get your break? And he just says, you'll be bored. But then he does tell her off screen. We don't actually see that moment on screen. And then we see him dropping her off, saying, where she then says, "To phir Kamal ji ban gaye, star Kamal." So there is, again, that acknowledgement that star making is a process, and that those on the inside are privy perhaps to this process in particular ways. And so I think, all of this is, I think, in very many ways thinking about what gazes, what constructions validate the male star versus the female star. And in this particular film, I think interestingly how the male co-stars and the male sorts of, the male cast and crew here are essential to making Millie then that star, right? Because the implication, of course, here is that, Kamal ji ban gaye, but Millie is also going to become Millie ji or something like that, right? And then I also want to come particularly to this frame, which is, if we take looking and seeing very seriously, what Malvi says must also hold true, where she says that there are circumstances in which looking itself it's a source of pleasure, but there is also a pleasure in being looked at. And John Berger, in many ways, reflects this in ways of seeing as well. He says men look at women, women watch themselves being looked at. The surveyor of woman in herself is male. And so the woman turns herself into an object. There is an internalization of the male gaze. And to me, anytime a woman has looked back, at the camera, through the camera to the audience, to the spectator, particularly when she is this object of desire on screen, there is this interesting sort of power dynamic, right? Again, I think both of these articles, whether Laura Mulvey's article or John Berger, are very much interested in the patriarchal male gaze, which undeniably does operate. But I'm obsessed with this GIF in Rangeela. Well, this is a GIF that I have gotten off the film, but I'm obsessed with this frame particularly. This is a moment in the song Tanha Tanha, where, she's both being shot by presumably Stephen Kapoor's camera, but obviously Ram Gopal Varma's camera is what is giving us this frame. And I always pause the film at this point, I'm very struck by the way in which the gaze is being returned by Urmila / Millie / whatever third character she is in that film. And so far I've generalized the audience of Rangeela as sort of a collective, a very generalized collective. But I want to ask today, what are different people seeing when they see this frame, right? And who is Urmila herself looking at when she is looking back? I don't think we can answer the second question with any definitive certainty, but I do also want to ask, particularly through the lens of gender, what does a man see when he looks at this frame? And what does a woman see when she sees this frame? And I'm also doing my own generalizing here by referring to cis and straight men and women. So very much thinking about a heteronormative gaze here. There is a lot more to be said about Rangeela through a queer gaze, and I cannot possibly do it justice in this talk, but we should maybe talk about it in our discussion. But this is one of the key frames that has made Rangeela linger in my mind for many years, right? When we think about the pleasures of looking and the pleasures, I would say, also of listening, because Rahman's music in this film is absolutely spectacular. spectacular. The film is encouraging and enabling it. But I also feel like in this particular frame, Urmila slash Millie is doing a sort of pedagogy. She is teaching spectators on how a desirable woman looks when she knows when she's being desired, presumably by men, like I said, a cis and straight gaze here. But also how a desirable woman performs desiring back, right? Because certainly her gaze is not passive. In fact, she is actively directing her gaze in particular ways at the spectator. I really am also very struck by what it meant for me to watch this as an 11-year-old on the cusp of a very strange and bewildering adolescence. Never an easy time for, I think, most teenagers, but especially, I don't think enough is said about adolescent women and the things that they go through in addressing their body, the changes in their body and psyche at that time. I felt like I was witnessing a tutorial on the kind of femininity that I had to aspire to be both a desirable object of sex, love, and romance. And at that age, they were almost the same thing in my mind. They're certainly not the same thing as an adult woman for me. And also as a reciprocally desiring subject, which I think in later years, I really came to understand in more complicated ways because I came to a realization in my late 20s that I increasingly identify as asexual, that is not feeling an attraction to either sex. And the lessons on femininity, desirability by the female film star, particularly through these formative years for me, felt very alien to my own experience of gender and sexuality. And I want to acknowledge there is, of course, a lot of ethical and feminist commentary here about, what film actresses represent for a young woman in her formative years, right? There's a lot of moralizing discourse about how they're bad role models and so on, which I'm completely uninterested in. But of course, this is a patriarchal film industry. They do set unrealistic beauty standards. They have a tremendous amount of power and capital through beauty and fashion industries. I also want to say that, thinking about the 90s moment when the Indian market was opened up to a range of foreign beauty and retail companies, and suddenly our middle class homes were flooded with products way beyond Fair and Lovely and talcum powder, right? Like suddenly we had lipstick and foundation. And, that was when I realized there's a whole world of makeup and fashion out there that I had just not been privy to. And the female film star in India has always sort of, in Hindi film especially, has been a brand ambassador for Lux, right? Sridevi herself was a Lux brand ambassador. Madhuri was. I think Urmila also was at some point. So there are various ways in which we have to think then about the commodification and the consumerist aspect of the female star process, right? And female stardom in general. But I also want to ask here then, what is the female spectator's relationship to the female film star? Because of course, we can talk about, Malvi and Berger are very much preoccupied with the male gaze, but I do want to ask, what is a cis and straight female gaze here doing in how we consume this image and how we then return the gaze and find our gaze being returned back, right? Whether or not we are the intended object of that gaze. I also want to ask, Millie can sometimes occupy moments in this film with her ordinariness, right? The ordinariness of the female body, which is not styled all the time, not always with makeup, more unglamorous femininity sometimes, a more natural femininity, I want to say. I'll put natural in quotes because that too can be very problematized. But I do think that, Southern cinemas have been a little bit more grounded in how the female star gets presented on screen. I think Hindi cinema has moved entirely away from that for the most part, where female-led films and female actors now are very much about the spectacle of stardom. And I do want to ask, how does a female spectator resolve having to inhabit bodies and spaces that are not, or that are both looked at and not looked at the way that the film star is being looked at in this frame, right? So what happens if you're a plain woman? What happens if you are not a glamorous woman? What happens if you are not an object that the male gaze is constantly turned towards? And I would argue that some of us as women feel invisible at times, right? In ways that we are not beautiful, glamorous objects, and that we don't get objectified necessarily through this sexual lens, either by other people, other men in particular, but also sometimes by ourselves. And I want to really think about what it means to be that kind of female spectator. And then I think I had. Yes. So that's kind of the question I'm asking here, right? Who is the female spectator? Is Rangeela made for her? This is a frame from the film towards the very end where the film within a film, Rangeela, is being screened in a private trial. Munna and Pakia turn up as well to watch it, but are then kicked out because some other distributors or someone has come. But I'm very struck by how there are no women in this audience, right? So in the film as well, the men are constructing Millie the star, and the men are the primary target audience for Millie the star. So who is the female spectator? Where is she, right? I really have that question in this film. Is Rangeela made for us, right? That's a tricky question to answer because what films really are made for us in Hindi cinema? And do female stars exist for female spectators is the other question that I have here. The person that I'm interested actually in reading is someone who responds to Malvi quite effectively, I think. Mary Ann Doan is another film scholar who's written specifically about female spectatorship. And she's not entirely invested in just the male gaze theory, right? She asks particularly of the female actor, attributing her a lot of agency. She asks, why might a woman flaunt her femininity and produce herself as an excess of femininity? In other words, why would a woman foreground the masquerade, right? And the masquerade is the sort of key analytical lens she then brings to this discussion, where she answers this question by saying the masquerade in flaunting femininity holds it at a distance. Womanliness is a mask which can be worn and removed. And I think you can see this constantly in interactions between Millie and Munna, where Millie is this ultimate glamorous icon on screen, but then she comes excitedly to Munna and says, "Look at me, I'm on the cover of this magazine," or "Look at me, I'm going to have a film screened in this place tomorrow." And that mask slips, right? It's not her glamorous feminine stardom that is still inhabiting the character. The character slips in and out of it, and I think that's very much interesting here. Dawn goes on to say the masquerade's resistance to patriarchal positioning would therefore lie in its denial of the production of femininity as closeness, as presence to itself, right? As something perhaps that is natural to all women. And this has been something of a problem that Freudian and psychoanalytic film critics have really sort of grappled with in terms of the female spectator, the idea that she is never fully, she's too involved with the female characters in film. There is an almost implicit closeness because all women must relate to women on screen in particularly intimate ways. And Dawn is saying that doesn't have to be the case. And I think what she says here is, to masquerade is to manufacture a lack in the form of a certain distance between oneself and one's image. And then she goes on to use the example of Marlene Dietrich in Hollywood, saying we're watching a woman demonstrate the representation of a woman's body. So there is, in fact, an artifice to this, right? There is an artificialness to how the female body gets represented. And perhaps this is what female spectatorship sees and understands of the female star, which is that the female star is validating the codes and signs of a socially approved femininity that she can access when she chooses to, but also she can choose not to access. And then she asks, what might it mean to masquerade as a female spectator, to assume the mask in order to see a different way? And then she says the female spectator is given two options: the masochism of over-identification, which I think speaks to a little bit to that proximity, right? That everything you feel is projected on and through the female star, or the narcissism entailed in becoming one's own object of desire, right? Really thinking about the distancing function of the female star image on screen. And she says the effectivity of the masquerade lies precisely in its potential to manufacture a distance from that image, to generate a problematic within which the image is manipulable, producible, and readable by the woman. And I come back to Rangeela and this frame particularly to treat this image as manipulable, producible, readable, right? All of these are manipulable, producible, readable scripts of femininity and desirability, right? Which I am always in some misalignment with, right? How can plain girls, plain women, ugly women really engage with such spectacular beauty? Always in troubling and disruptive ways, I think, but which also allows me to then see the manufacturing of feminine desirability as an artificial thing. It is not fake, but interconnected with all the unstable productions of what it means to be a woman in Indian society. And I think that there is something somewhat freeing about this, right? Because now we can see playing with gender as a possibility. Like we can play with femininity, choose to embrace it, lean into it at certain times, and choose to divorce ourselves from it also at particular times. So femininity is both a problem but also a possibility, right? And that tension is a good thing. We can do many things as women, both being and leaning into what it means to be a woman, or socially approved conventions of what it means to be a woman, and move away from it. And I think one of the interesting things about Rangeela that I constantly also, when I listen to it endlessly on loop, is, who are the female singers of Millie, like that voice Millie, right? Traditionally, Hindi cinema likes to stick with one voice for one actor as a form of consistency, and kind of in using the song and the song and dance disruption as a sort of narrative continuity, right? And feminine interiority. So thinking about what Lata Mangeshkar meant to certain stars, or Asha Bhonsle did with, say, Rekha in Umra Jaan, right? Like the interiority of the character is really melded with the singing voice in particular ways. But in Rangeela, there are two songs with Asha Bhosle, Tanha Tanha and Rangeela Re. But Pyari Ye Jaane Kaisa Hai has Kavita Krishnamurti, Shweta Shetty sings Mangta Hai Kya, Swarnalata singing Hai Rama, Yaro Sun Lo Zara is Chitra. To me, this film is really talking about this multiplicity of feminine voices, right? And there are different states of femininity, I would argue, that are being manufactured through the song and dance spectacle. And this voicing also is a function, has the function of breaking from the male gaze and allowing more forms of masquerade, right? Like what Millie is embodying in Mangta Hai Kya, in its absurdity with the flying couch going around the world, and what she's embodying in Tanha Tanha are entirely different states of being, right? And I feel like there's something here about the various possibilities of feminine performance and non-performance that the female actor can sometimes, the female star can perhaps embody. And so I'm thinking this really, in many ways, for me, makes Rangeela still a delightful watch, right? It's not unproblematic, but there is a real pleasure in seeing the feminine performance here being rendered in its sort of realness, which is that it has to be manufactured through a lot of effort and through a variety of institutions. I'm very struck by Jean Baudrillard, who is a French post-structuralist, who is extremely skeptical of visual culture generally, has an essay literally titled "The Evil Demon of Images." But one of the things that he says here is the secret of the image must not be sought in its differentiation from reality and hence in its representative value, but on the contrary, in its telescoping into reality, its short circuit with reality, and finally in the implosion of image and reality. For us, there is an increasingly definitive lack of differentiation between image and reality, which no longer leaves room for representation as such. And I'm very struck by the possibilities here of why perhaps Rangeela remains pleasurable, which is that this female star is not meant to be a realistic representation of womanhood. She is the impossibility. She is the non-real. I think the unreal is a whole other word, but the non-real, right? And it's a break from the real. And so I think the possibilities of female fantasy here for the female spectator, I would argue, are very important to consider, because I do think for people who navigate femininity through a visual culture that is now almost inescapable, I don't think any of us can escape the sort of assault of images we are bombarded with through media in all forms: advertising, social media, billboards, every space you can imagine. Women's images are what we are surrounded by. But I think that in such an age, how do we then find a notion of femininity that we can sit comfortably with, or non-femininity? Because I would argue there are moments where I have definitely felt disconnected from my own femininity. And for me, Rangeela suggests that all of it is performance, and we should never buy into this idea that there is a real femininity, that we can always play with it and mess with how real femininity is in all of these ways. I also think one of the important reasons I come back to Rangeela is because we're in a crisis of the female star in this current moment. Most of the big name female stars, even of the 2010s, I'm thinking of Deepika Padukone or Alia Bhatt, have sort of retreated a little bit from the big budget mainstream films. There's a whole debate about nepotism, which is often, I will say, unfairly targeted on the women kids of Bollywood, right? The Kapoor daughters and so on. Who are also themselves increasingly conforming to a very formulaic production of the female star. So we are in a crisis. I don't think the kind of star-making process that once existed in the 1990s exists now, which is part of the problem. Social media is part of the problem. But I also think that star-making, the risks of star-making, right, of converting a female actor into a star, I think have largely been absorbed into the larger industrialization process in Hindi cinema. And so it's interesting to think about, what would make make a star today? How could you manufacture a star today? What institutions are going to be important to recover or to recreate or create anew entirely? And I think Rangeela showed that a different invention of stardom was possible in the 90s, and maybe we should take lessons and try to actually really push our creative energies towards the generation of new stardom for women in this particular age. Women, and I will say even queer. I'm perfectly fine with it also being non-binary or androgynous or having an aesthetic that really plays with gender expectations as well. That's all I really had in terms of my interest in Rangeela. And of course, I would be delighted to participate in all of your conversations, comments, questions, any of it. Thank you. I'll stop sharing right now.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. I've been getting lots of comments, even direct comments about how wonderful your presentation has been. It was really great the way you wove in readings from everyone, Marianne Dawn to Laura Mulvey. And also close reading of moments from the film, but also around the film. The point that you made about the singers and your interpretation of that was something I had not at all noticed till you brought it up. It's been really wonderful laying out. Also from a personally invested position, what the film meant to you, how you've thought yourself through the film. So thanks very much for bringing in all these aspects. The discussion is now open. Anyone who wants to come in at this point, please unmute yourself so I know that you want to speak. Geeta, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhila. Thank you, Pallavi. It was really a brilliant presentation. I enjoyed every moment of it. Of course, your focus was on Urmila and her role in the film, as well as you analyzed her as a star text. But I would say that, of course, that is extremely important in the context of Rangeela, as well as the 90s Bollywood mainstream film. But along with her, even Amir Khan's role, I think that was also, a kind of a redefinition of the male in Bollywood cinema, because he is not that usual self-assured kind of a hero. He's edgy, and he is insecure, and so that those dynamics, I thought, along with Urmila Matondkar's recasting her as this glamorous woman with ambition, was very interesting. And also Rangeela became some kind of a trend-setting film after it was released, because if we look at Dil To Pagal Hai, I have that in mind, Madhuri's film. That was also about, this woman who, a dancer with ambition. So it became some kind of, like I said, it set a trend, to in Bollywood of women-centric films, women with agency. And as in Rangeela, along with being insecure, Amir Khan is not the driver of the plot, which I think is a very major breakthrough for Bollywood cinema. So these are, just some of the observations and a response to your presentation.
I want to
Thank
also
you.
say that Yes, of course. Just to respond to that quickly, I think it's almost urban legend at this point, but Amir Khan famously stopped attending award ceremonies after he lost the award of this film. I can't remember who, maybe it was Shah Rukh Khan who won it for maybe DDLJ, if I'm remembering right, or maybe somebody else. But in any case, this seems to have been the last time he attended a Filmfare Award ceremony because he was nominated for playing Munna in Rangeela and didn't win. And I feel like there is something very telling here also about the kinds of masculinity that the cinema, the awards culture in Hindi cinema also rewards and sees as valorizing in awards, right? So I think both his rendering of a character that is struggling with his masculinity and what it means to be a man deserving of a woman's love, through caste and class lens, you can think about the Topori as this very outcast figure in Hindi cinema more writ large across different people, different generations even, but also the name Munna, right? He has no surname. At one point early on in the film, Millie's mother says, but Dil ka bahut acha hai. He's a nice man at heart, even though he does not have a family and he's an orphan. And so there is something here about his lack of, parentage and genealogy that presents an anxiety of sorts, right? But it is, of course, neutralized because his love for Millie is very pure, and that's the way in which he gets validated. But that is not Rajkamal's masculinity, which is always assured, always something he's in charge of and in control of, unlike Munna, right? And I think there's that I think you're right in that the masculinity in this film is fascinating to observe as well, and the ways in which the feminine confidence is really the counterpoint to that, I think, is very interesting. So thank you for those comments. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sridhar and Dr. Usha Rao have both unmuted. Would you like to come in? Sridhar.
Dr. Usha Rao is my mother. So
Oh,
just be
oh,
prepared.
sorry. Okay. Does she want to speak? Dr. Usha Rao, would you like to?
Mama, you have something to say?
Unmute.
Yeah, you're unmuted. Yes. Mama, now you muted yourself.
Okay. Madhavi Ravi Kumar, you want
Yes. Yes. Can I ask now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
please
Yes,
go ahead.
Madhuri, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm sorry I lost your presentation because of my internet connection, but it is an excellent presentation, Dr. Rao. And I have few questions actually because I'm new to this thing. But I was just thinking, I was just struck by how Rangeela constructs Millie's journey through glamorous visuals and choreography. In your view, does the film offer her genuine agency, or is her rise largely framed through the desires of male characters and the male gaze? And also, I was thinking that because when I watched this movie a long time back, and again when we are trying to discuss here again, I watched that. So I was just thinking that, the class dynamic between Munna and Rajkamal, that is the central to this romantic tension actually. Do you see Rangeela as a reflecting of socio-economic anxieties and aspirations of a post-liberalization India, and how does Mumbai as a cinematic space facilitate or complicate this tension? And my last question is, if Rangeela were to release today, how do you think its gender politics and visual treatment would be received, especially in the era of feminist media criticism and digital audience?
Yeah, all very good questions. The way you phrase that first question is itself interesting to me. Does the film offer her genuine agency? And I think one of the things with the female star and other stars generally also is, who is this her, right? Like I really feel like one of the struggles of Rangeela, which I think is a very productive struggle, is that we're never quite sure, like, are we watching Urmila or Millie, and the blurring of the two, right? Which is exactly what star theory says happens when the star is manufactured. But I also want to say within a film, there is a lot of meta textual stuff happening here with the song and dance spectacles in particular, because we don't see many of the other scenes that the film is being shot with, right? There's one scene where she's telling Rakesh that she loves him, or that, I can't believe you love me and things like that. So there's these little snippets of other scenes. There is no full-fledged character that Millie gets to play that we get a glimpse of, right? Our actual understanding of Millie is, of course, the actor who is trying to get a leg into the industry. In that, I do feel like she is afforded some interiority, but I do agree with you that there is no complete agency for the character. However, because film is an audiovisual medium, and really reading off of like what Usha Iyer has said about Madhuri Dixit's stardom, the song and dance spectacles really complicate this idea of agency itself, because it is very true that Urmila Matondkar as Millie gets to occupy the screen for such long moments with a dancing repertoire, with a control over her fashion and her presentability and her image making. There I see Urmila Matondkar's agency reflected. And so to me, this is a complicated question of, should the character within the film represent the complete agency we wish to see as feminists? Or do we also see agency in the ways in which actors get to control some of the representation that their characters are then parsed through, right? I think it's more productive to think of the latter. Because you're right in that if Rangeela were released today, I do feel like we would read so much into the male gaze here and how Millie as the character is produced through Munna, through Kamal, through Stephen Kapoor, through Ram Gopal Verma, that it would almost instantly be dismissed as anti-feminist, as spectacular, as objectification, etc., etc. But I feel like there's a reason these stars have lingered in our popular imagination, in our cultural imagination for so many years in ways that I feel actually come from a space of power. I don't want to imagine these actors as being entirely without that power. I think Madhuri Dixit has earned her space here in Hindi cinema, in even through all the way now through her middle age, right? She's on TV as a dance judge. She's, in all of these alternative productions on streaming platforms. She has a YouTube channel where she makes sabudana khichdi with her husband. You know what I mean? There's media platforms galore, and she's on all of them, and she still captures her audience. So there's I think a level of power that an agency that they've still accrued, despite the fact that much of their image has been filtered through the male gaze. And I want to treat that in a complicated way, because I don't think it's without all of its attendant problems of caste, class, very idealized notions of femininity. Patriarchy, of course, is a huge part of this. It's all there. But these women's voices, their bodies, their visibility is also there. And so to think of it in that complicated way, I think is very useful for me, and also allows me to still see the pleasure in this, right? Like understand why my pleasure is a complicated thing, but it's not illegitimate, is what I want to say. And I think that there's something about that also that is important. But your second question, I think, is also interesting, right? The class divide between Munna and Kamal. I don't think the film is really interested in class politics as in this very sort of Marxist way. I do think it's interesting for Ram Gopal Verma to have scripted Munna the way that he did. And I really want to give credit here to the dialogue writers. Neeraj Vora is a spectacular dialogue writer. All of his films, actually, where he's written the dialogues, Hera Fairy is one more, and I think Dord is another. The dialogues are really sparkling, right? And I think there's something about how Amir Khan was able to render the Topori as this believable figure in this film because of this excellent screenplay and dialogue writing by these writers. And I think what's interesting for me is Ram Gopal Verma thinking of the Topori as the average spectator. That for me is where the class politics becomes interesting, because we do not have any sensibility today, I would argue, that caters to that common man of the non-multiplex cinema, right? The single screen theaters. Who is going to those theaters and watching these films? Are they ever catered to? And I would argue we're in an era of very much middle class and very bourgeois cinema, right? I don't think this character and this figure really feature as the targets of cinema. Even when the films are made about them, my sense is that they're actually targeted towards a more urban elite audience and not towards these people themselves. So for me, like Ram Gopal Verma imagining Munna as the spectator of a film like Rangeela, as the public that gets to make that star and validate that star, I think is a class commentary of sorts, right? Which is that public did exist. I would argue still exists. If they have films made for them, I believe they'll show up. And we can talk about a range of other film industries where I do feel like Tamil cinema in particular, I think, has a lot more working class elements. Telugu cinema on and off does. Malayalam cinema definitely does as well. So I feel like when we're talking about Hindi cinema, that particular particular audience member has sort of drifted out of the imagination. Kamal to me really represents just a member of the film industry, and so in some ways it's again less about class but more about sort of the decision making power of what kinds of films get to be made and who gets to make those decisions and whose gaze directs who the female star is. So direct class politics, no, but there is an implicit class politics here in the class politics of spectatorship that I think are reflected through the film. Interestingly, I hope that kind of addressed some of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pallavi and Madhavi, for the responses. Rashmika and Titiksha have raised their hand. Rashmika first, and then we'll go to Titiksha. Rashmika, go ahead.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Hi, Pallavi. Yeah, you
Hi.
mentioned Rangeela in the context of the star making process and how the female body is shaped from male gaze. It made me think of Silk Smita and how her stardom in the 80s was also built around sensuality and spectacle. Do you see any parallels between the way Rangeela handles these themes and how Silk Smita was portrayed in that era?
Some parallel. So this comes back to that the heroine vamp binary, right? Silk Smitha was very much in an era and in a film industry where the vamp was an important figure to serve as a counterfoil to the perfect, ideal, good woman, right? The heroine of the film. The film that immediately comes to mind, actually, for me, is a more complicated film, actually, Moonram Pire, which was I think dubbed maybe into Sadma in Hindi, or was it remade? I wasn't sure. But Silk Smitha plays a slightly more interesting, somewhat vampish character in that film. That's a little bit more complicated. She's given more grace there, but in a range of other films, she is kind of like the item number figure. The scholar Jenny Rowena has a great couple of articles on Silk Smitha's particular objectification in the time that she was in, coming herself, I believe, from a Dalit subcaste, but if not Dalit caste, it was definitely a lower caste background. And the ways in which caste logics really constructed her on-screen image as this other woman, right? Very much ideas of sexuality that were not empowering sexuality all the time, but were very much about this idea of a rogue sexuality, a promiscuous sexuality, a woman who represented the dangers of that. Silk Smita herself, I think, Dirty Picture is not a good film, and for a lot of reasons, but it does try to present her as someone navigating and struggling for an agency in those circumstances. And I think from all other life accounts of Silk Smita, this is very true. So I do want to say that, even though she's very much to be seen as someone who is oppressed through certain dynamics in that industry, she did navigate, struggle for, and find a space where she could leverage some of her capital to ensure she had some control over storytelling. But the parallels for me are that the 90s movement is less interested in vampy figures like that, and that the heroine herself starts to embrace or lean into performative sexuality, right? That as feminists should excite us, because we don't want perfect, chaste, good heroines, good girls who don't, who never think about sex or never think about desire. Silk Smita is still from an age, unfortunately, where the binary of these of the kinds of women, good women versus bad women, I think directed a lot of the storytelling and the cinematography around her representation. So I will recommend reading Jenny Rowena's pieces. They're really good.
Okay, thanks. Titiksha, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, that was really interesting. I really enjoyed the presentation a lot. And it's very interesting that Silk Smita was brought up, because I was thinking of what Rangeela does for Urmila, Parinita does for Vidya. And to have that, I was having that thought in the back of my mind. That's not my main question. So I'm also interested in the aspects of spectatorship, desire, and all of such things. And I've been revisiting Mazumdar, who also talks about Rangeela in relation to the Tapori figure. But also mainly my think was that I don't know if you've encountered Tejaswini Ganti's work, but she also sort of talks about how the respectability of women being related to, or being actively desiring to be a part of the film industry, how that has a sort of less of a caste and more of a class impact, which is what a claim that Kanti makes, which I think I sort of agree with in the way that she makes her claim. I was wondering if that plays more of a role in how Verma shows Minnie's family and like places her family in a sort of class conflict more than a caste conflict. And if that might be the reason why she does not face the sort of lack, like, loss of respectability that like somebody coming from probably a more I don't know how to like say this in a better words, like a more middle class than her family. So yeah.
One of the, I think that's absolutely fair. And I do think this is also though a legitimate criticism of the ways in which films can obscure or erase caste entirely, right? That caste gets transmuted into a class question, and this is often a lot of anti-caste scholars have pointed this out. And my interest is actually in 1990s news media industries, where I'm struggling still, but I try to argue that we can't see them as distinct processes, because class formation in India is implicitly tied to how certain castes were able to enter the middle class and therefore efface certain elements of material caste realities, right? And convert them into a cultural practice. So I think in this film, the fact that they're Brahmin is still worth mentioning, because I think culturally there are elements that could seep in here in the ways that a sari is worn, for instance, or the food that they eat. One of the earliest interviews of Urmila Matondkar I remember reading in Filmfare, or was it Filmfare or was it Stardust? I can't remember. But a journalist goes to her house and her mother makes them poha. And then Urmila talks about being a typical Maharashtrian mulgi. And there's all of this stuff here that's clearly coded as trying to indicate a certain Marathi Brahmin sensibility, I think, that really lingers in my mind. So I feel like it's interesting when we think about how much these actors still reflect and assert their caste, right? In these offline or off-screen moments. Madhuri Dixit very often did it. In fact, her arranged marriage, the whole thing was to say that I will only marry within my caste and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a sort of assertion of caste in those off-screen realities where they show up, the kinds of ways in which they dress and how they speak a certain kind of linguistic dialect, right? All of these things are there. But on screen, they get to be a little bit more flexible and meddle with the kinds of caste roles they can play, not always with a lot of diversity. And in this film, I think you're right. I think what's interesting is Ram Gopal Verma is not interested in them as a Brahmin family. I feel like if this was a slightly more social realist film that wanted to capture some of the class realities of this family, you would have to factor in some knowledge of their being Brahmin into it. The family is not relevant here, which is, I think, the choice of the plot and the screenplay and so on. But to me, I feel like caste is implicitly reflected in certain class formation. Which communities owned a house in Bombay, right? That they could then have a lower room that they could rent out to a tapori. You know what I mean? Like real estate in Bombay has caste realities, where you live, what locality you live in. Dadar famously has like a Konkanasta Brahmin hegemony, right? And Gujarati Baniya hegemony as well. You have all of these neighborhoods. The Tamil Brahmins are in Matunga and so on. So there's some very real realities of caste and urban planning here that will definitely be reflected in a different kind of film. I think you'll see it in Satya, which is a very different film that Ram Gopal Verma makes in a few years. But in this film, I feel like he just wants to completely strip any class and caste politics out of the equation, because his investment is in the female star. So I'll say it's complicated, right? I think the caste and class are there. You're right that it's in the background, but I'm never completely comfortable letting go of caste that easily. I feel like it's there no matter what we try to do. Its implications in modernity, I think, are actually very entangled and complex, and so that's why I keep bringing it back to the foreground when I can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes complete sense. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else who wants to speak now? Please unmute yourself so I know that you want to come in. Oh yes, Fabian, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation. It was really very interesting. I'm interested, and I wrote myself and still writing about female gaze, and my approach is questioning a respectful gaze. And for example, I try to demonstrate that in Kumar Shahani cinema, there is a respectful gaze. For example, in a film I analyzed like Maya Darpan. But in this film, Rangeela, I was asking, is it respectful? There is, it is not unrespectful, but it is not respectful. It's a frontier. It's on the frontier between respect and unrespect. It's still a film for a male audience, more or less. But a woman can appreciate it because there is no real humiliation, on the way the body is filmed, on the distance. Mulvey, Laura Mulvey, she was the first one in the 70s to demonstrate that the way you zoom in the body, the belly, some part of the body, are really part of what we call a male gaze. And it is not completely the case in Rangeela because there is a kind of respect. For example, if you compare with Stanley Kubrick film Eyes Wide Shut, when he films the body of this American actress Nicole Kidman, she's the way she is filmed by Kubrick, and Kubrick is my favorite, one of my favorite director. I think he's a genius, and but the way he films Nicole Kidman is so shameful. This is one of the most shameful way to demonstrate a male gaze. And so all these feminists and theorists had approach on the body, but the body is not. We should also focus on something else than the body, the face. When there are too much makeup, the way to focus on the lips, the way to focus on certain look, the way the eyes are presented in the film, the way the face suggests, the face can suggest a lot of sexualization too. And I think in the Indian cinema, even when there is this male gaze, it is not as shameful as the Western. In France, for example, a lot of filmmaker, the way they don't do it anymore now, but the way they used to do it in the 90s. And I think Eyes Wide Shut was in the 90s, no? A film. It was really exaggerated. And I think Me Too had changed a lot of things in the way the body and the faces of the woman are portrayed and framed. And I think this is very important. We should, of course, the body is something important, but the face, the way the face is suggesting something that is not respectful, is also a very interesting topic that we should insist on. But I really...
Yes.
But what would you say? Would you say the way the women are portrayed in this film are respectful or not?
I'm very wary of either or questions, I will say, in reading films, right? Because I'd like to believe that when we read films, we also have agency as viewers and readers to implicitly gauge meanings, perhaps, that are not intended, but because film is such a slippery medium, can allow themselves to be seen in certain ways. To me, I feel like the word respectful is a complicated thing to navigate in a place like India, because respect is very much loaded into caste and class conventions in ways that make me uncomfortable sometimes, right? Like I use the word respectable in this when I was describing, for instance, Millie's character, because the respectable woman is the good woman. And so when she is granted an automatic respect for being Brahmin or being from a certain background or performing femininity in the socially appropriate ways, I am wary of that that respect, right? Even though perhaps the gaze of the camera might be most respectful in that it is not dehumanizing her, it is not objectifying her, it is not commodifying her, it is still rendering her a sort of hegemonic ideal subject who is a certain kind of chaste Indian femininity that I am not comfortable with. So the respectful is not always for me the best way to understand perhaps if something is feminist, right? If something is empowering the woman. And I also don't think that is almost always never a binary, that there is no easy way to say this is an empowered representation, this is not an empowered representation. I think film particularly complicates how the politics of feminist looking can operate, both because of the makers, but also because images often do their own thing. I'm really struck by the work of W.J.T. Mitchell, who thinks of images as unruly objects, right? They're not something that can be simply harnessed and controlled by the people who make them any more than they can be controlled by the audiences that circulate them. And so I like to think of images as, always slippery, contingent. They mess with our very coherent, stable meanings that we want to associate with them. And that slipperiness is something of a joy, because I can read this film and find pleasure in it in all of these moments. And someone can very clearly read into it and say, no, it is objectifying. It is very much about the sexualization of a woman in particular ways. And I have heard this argument, it traps Urmila in that image, right? I don't think she ever was able to fully shed the Rangeela effect, even though she tried very hard with films like Satya and Pinjar and what are some of the other films? Corn, she did a whole bunch of horror films as well. All sorts of interesting experimentation with roles. But Rangeela is what she gets remembered in. So the image is also a trap, right, in that way. So I think the respectful gaze, Ram Gopal Verma famously is not a respectful person himself. I will fully acknowledge this. He is a very fraught figure in film circles. He has said outrageous, obnoxious things in real life. So I have no interest in suggesting that he is in fact respecting Urmila here. I think, like I said, for me, Urmila's agency in constructing her stardom here is interesting. For me, the feminist act is to recognize that she has some agency and choice here, and a way of benefiting from the gaze, despite everything in a male-dominated industry, right? Like the female star was able to exist, and so exist and wield some power is what I wanted to say. So I want to read some feminist possibilities in that. Is the whole project feminist? No, I don't think we can ever say that about any film in general coming out of the Hindi cinema industries, especially. But like I said, feminist possibilities are always more exciting and interesting in that way for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian and Pallavi. David, I think, do you want to come in? Your video is turned
Yes,
on.
can you hear me now?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Okay, a substantive question and a trivial one. The substantive, some of us recently watched The Substance, and it's just on the fly. Does anyone have any thoughts about the comparison between the two, both exploring the theme of the female star and the film industry creating the female star, valuing certain aspects of a person and having a complete lack of interest in other aspects of the person. And that might be a fruitful line to explore for a few minutes. The trivial question, I watched the version of the film that was shared with the group, and I found that the lips of the people speaking didn't seem to match what they were saying. So was this copy of the film dubbed? And if so, I wondered why. And I also found that the English subtitles seemed to come and go, and it was quite difficult to follow the plot, such as it was. So
yeah, so I apologize for that. We could not, I don't think we found a free copy of the film that was appropriately subtitled. And I think Nikhila mentioned in her message to me as well that the subtitles may need to be adjusted. The VLC player allows, so the subtitles I think were behind a little bit, if I remember right. So they definitely didn't align. And I'm sorry you watched it without aligned subtitles. I did yesterday while just Googling something, find an uploaded subtitle copy on YouTube that I'm happy to share actually, which I might do right now. YouTube notoriously keeps taking things down. So I feel like There's always films that come and go because of that. Rangeela has come and gone several times. I actually paid for a version on YouTube, but this one right now, as of today, still exists on YouTube. So I'm just going to drop the link in the group chat, if that's okay with you. Please make sure to open it, and hopefully you can rewatch it and feel like you were you were in sync with what was going on there. I have only recently watched The Substance, and it's a delightfully zany film, nothing like Rangeela. In terms of themes, of course, there are tremendous overlaps, but it is a body horror film. And Rangeela is possibly the entire opposite of that, which is it's a body celebration film. And I guess it is very feminist in its gaze and what it's trying to suggest, particularly I think of the aging female body, which Hindi cinema has not always done a very good job of perhaps of representing and sort of negotiating and seeing also still as a desirable feminine body, right? I think there are a few films that have tried to mess with that here and there, sometimes in the fringes of Hindi cinema. So my feeling is that The Substance is more substantive in the sense of like actual feminist commentary on what it means to be a female body in the public gaze, very much being produced through male and female gazes, but also having lost that visibility as power, and then what it might mean to have to regain that through the idea of youth and beauty and an alter ego, I guess, who is then manufacturing your stardom in particular ways, in new ways for a new image and for a new generation. And I think there's lots to think about there, but I'd be interested if other people have thoughts on relating The Substance to Rangeela.
Yeah, thanks. South Asian Solidarity Initiative wanted to make a comment, and then Dr. Usha Rao. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry about my handle. My name is Sonia, and I just wanted to thank you so much for this talk. I love this film. I'm so excited to get an academic kind of discussion to it. But I just wanted to chime in and say I wanted to highlight your comment about a film not being entirely feminist or entirely anti-feminist. I think feminist possibilities are always more exciting. I could not fully agree. I could not agree more. That's what I meant. And I think I love this movie. I watched it as a kid growing up in Bombay. I watched it recently as an adult, and it's one of the movies that has aged well for me. Like, I'm delighted by it still. And I think one of the reasons is, of course, for me, is the character of Rangeela. I see liberation in her. I see her having this really frankly this polyamorous kind of multiple love affairs where her family is not a factor in how she lives her life. She lives her life in her own terms, and she is sexy, she's fun, she's kinky, she's enjoying her attention that she's getting from all these two men who have, I think you mentioned something about the film not having a class background. I think it does play with class in a fun kind of preppy way, right? Like Amir Khan, him in the restaurant, and that whole scene where he's awkward in these high class spaces, and Jackie Shroff is not. He's the elite, and so there is, I think, a class point being made about who she chooses and why she makes these choices. But regardless, she's having fun and she's not blamed for making these choices. And so I think I love that movie for all those reasons. And yeah, I think it's a feminist movie. I don't know if it's a feminist. I don't know if I want to go that far, but I think it is also made for the female gaze. As somebody who identifies as a woman, and as a femme, as a queer femme, I think it is made for my gaze as well, for sure.
I think this is a film made totally for a lesbian gaze. I'm just going to say that. It's there implicitly, explicitly. If you're queer, you're looking at Urmila, I get you. That's all I will say. I see you. And we all see Urmila, I think, is what I will completely validate there. So yes, thank you for that comment, Sonia. It's really nice to see you here.
Dr. Usha Rao, please go ahead.
Hi, Mama. Do you want to speak? I don't know if she can figure out unmuting it.
She had unmuted herself briefly.
Before, I don't know where
Yeah.
she's. She wants to talk about the
Okay,
music, which I know
while
she loves.
yeah, there she is. You want to?
Oh,
Oh no.
Mama, just hit the unmute button once. It will unmute you.
Again, I have wait.
Yes, we can hear you.
Wait,
Hello. Ask your
wait.
question.
Huh. Are you able to hear my
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
yeah. So first thing, Pallavi, it was a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'm so enamored by all these learned people adding such useful comments. Initially, I thought it will be Greek and Latin for me, but I really enjoyed. Now, I would like to say that the beautiful songs, how can we forget the music that A.R. Rahman created? And Asha Bhosle was superb. Hello?
Yes, we're listening to you. Go on.
Yeah. So I only remember how much you enjoy listening to that when you're cooking, when you're doing anything at the background. And I thought, why Pallavi likes this movie so much? So, all in all, when you have nicely dissected, bisected, and given all the best of the film, now I realize, yes, because we just watch the film for what it is. We old people, if you remember the old time heroines, they had such expressive face. They could convey all their emotions only by face, that body language, uh, dressing up, and all that was so good in the olden days. So it was a complete change when we saw Urmila Matondkar, and we remember her as a Lakdi ki Kaathi pe Ghoda, that small girl. And
Yeah.
growing up, and it was really a very nice film, very entertaining and good to watch. And Pallavi, thank you for bringing all these subtle things.
Thank you for coming, Mama. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Speaking about Asha Bhosle specifically, actually,
Yes.
Asha Bhosle was I don't think was singing playback as much in the late 80s and early 90s.
Correct.
This
Correct.
film,
That's what.
yeah,
Yes.
this film brought her back to the mainstream. Like after this, she made
Yes.
Janam Sancha Karo and continued to
Yes.
voice so many other songs.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Rahman just resurrected her whole career, and I don't know what light went on in his brain thinking about an older woman singing the voice, this dreamy
Yes.
voice,
Yes.
like fantasy songs of like a character like Millie. But yes, absolutely, the music is
Like
spectacular. You
her
can
voice matched Urmila
yes,
so perfectly. You
yes,
wouldn't imagine she's age is older than her. And she
yes,
was so vivacious and lively
yes.
that music brought life. That's
Yeah,
what.
I mean, I will say Saroj Khan combined with Asha Bhosle, combined with
Yeah, of
Urmila
course.
Matondkar, right? There's the entire female effort
Yes,
here in producing the female
of course,
star.
of
So,
course, of course.
so yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mama.
you. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else who would like to come in now? Please unmute yourself so I know you want to speak. I was thinking about something that probably we have not touched upon, or maybe Madhavi's question earlier did bring it up. After watching this film, this was like decades later, I was watching this film again, and something that another film that I have watched repeatedly and grown pretty close to, a Kannada film called Lucia, was a film that that came up so strongly after watching Rangeela. And I was thinking of the possibility of juxtaposing these two and seeing these two films as two different moments. 90s, the moment of liberalization when Munna still has a chance, to get the heroine. And then in 2013 in Lucia, where Nikki becomes a dream in comatose Nikhil's story that he's weaving to himself. So it's almost as if that figure is pushed deep into the recesses of the psyche, but into the recesses of the social psyche. I mean, the impossibility of a figure like Nikki and him winning out in the end, which was still there in Rangeela. And here is just a dream of a big man's small dream, or something like that Lucia ends with. So I was like, I mean, this looks so. These two films seem like such intertexts of each other. I mean, and they seem to capture two different ages, and the narrative possibilities seem to me to suggest like a whole world, that we have traversed between 1995 and 2013. So I thought, Rangeela, when I started thinking about it academically, was discussed as a film which also explores the woman in times of liberalization, and like Tejaswini Niranjana and Susie Taru's essay on what liberalization and feminism, how they go ahead, and so on. So it was a moment. I mean, it was a film that captured that moment. But now, looking back and thinking about it, it's also like a kind of impossibility, or a kind of deep-seated, absent presence that it seems to embody. So that was my response, Pallavi, to Rangeela.
No, thank you for that. I watched Lucia in the theater long ago with Samvarta, if I remember right. And I don't really remember the film very strongly, but you're right in that I think there's something about the dream, right? Like the film as this material thing, but filmmaking and the film image as sort of having some sort of corollary or some relationship perhaps to dream images. And in this film, so many of the songs are dream sequences. Hai Rama is a dream sequence. Mangta Hai Kya is a dream sequence. Kya Kare Kya Na Kare has dreamy elements coming and going. So many dream sequences. So I just feel like, and Yai Re, the Rangeela Re is a dream song. So there's something here also. I think you're right in how people and objects are rendered through a certain imagination and dream fantasy. I think there's possibility of more Freudian stuff to read into this than we can deal with, I think, right now. But I'll revisit Lucia and keeping this in mind. I think it'll be very interesting. I think you're muted, Nikhila. Yeah.
Sorry, Samvartha, Tarakeshwar, anyone else who wants to come in now?
I just quickly want to say that this is one of the few movies where Amir Khan is a main character, but he's not the central character. Like, he doesn't just dominate like every scene. I mean, he does the ones that he shows up in, but that it's also like really special. That's I don't know.
I think what is interesting is he's often accused of controlling the directors, right? Like having a say in the creative vision of a film. In this film, I actually think he has no. This is Ram Gopal Verma's creative vision, and he is along for the ride, and that is also delightful to see.
Yeah, Samvartha, please go ahead.
Hi, Pallavi, thanks a lot for
Thank you for engineering this.
giving more reasons to love this film. And thanks a lot for pausing so much on Urmila's face for so long during your presentation. Of course, I had to say that. I have two requests. One is Pallavi, and the other is for TFO. Let me actually say my request to TFO first. I mean, if TFO is planning to come up with a publishing unit, please consider this as, transcribing this entire presentation and conversation as a booklet. I think it's worth it. And Pallavi, of the several conversations on Rangeela, there was one conversation where you actually kind of spoke to me about the song picturization. I would really like you to actually kind of speak about that a bit. It's incomplete without that for me, and I think even for you. And for
Do you want to
entire
remind me
session.
what I told you? Because I feel like I have rambled so much that I can't recollect what I might have said.
Okay, no, I think, especially it was with how he actually kind of picturizes Bombay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Well,
uh,
the city is the third character in a lot of these
yeah.
songs, right? And I think with Amir Khan's Munna's character and with a little bit with Rangeela Re, which is the opening song, the city is the vessel where all of these fantasies of being and becoming can be made possible. It's a very, I mean, I'm thinking of this in contrast to All We Imagine Is Light, which was accused of having a very grim view of Bombay, right? This film to me is not at all in that vein. This is the romantic Bombay, the Bombay of possibility, the Bombay of hope, the Bombay of dream making and dream realization, I guess, dream manifesting. That's very much there in this. But the song that I have, every now and then I play the whole soundtrack and then I come back fixated on a new song each time. And this year, that song has been Kya Kare Kya Na Kare. There is something about the ways in which the night streets of Bombay are imagined there. Amir Khan like breaks a bottle and then everyone jumps out of their balcony and then just joins him on the street. And as a Tapori, the street is his adda, right? So it is his space. And that's where he projects his vision of Millie for dancing and singing. But it's also like the Tapori is and the larger so-called lumpens, right? I'm thinking of Yaire also, where random people are just joining along and dancing, is never seen as threatening, which for a female, a female body in the public space in India is unthinkable. Like any of us who have occupied public space in ways that might involve us being visible in particular ways have never sort of experienced it as a safe place, right? It is always filled with imagined and real dangers, I think. And in this film, it just does not have that possibility, partially because it is rendered through dreams, I think, but also the fantasy. And I think that really is what's going on with Bombay in its sort of formative days. The beaches are empty. I cannot imagine that happening right now. Urmila is dancing freely one morning on a beach when a Bollywood film star can walk by and just see her. The way in which the city is imagined as a space of constant possibility, I think, is what actually makes also the film really possible, right? Like the film really believable in some ways. And for many of us who didn't grow up in Bombay, I didn't grow up in Bombay. And for me, it has always been a very happy place to visit because I feel like there's so much happening. It is very much the urban maelstrom. And so I have mostly positive associations with Bombay, possibly because I've never lived there and never had to do the grind and the hustle and the very real sort of struggles of what it means to live in the city. But Millie is also a sort of product of Bombay's modernity, right? Where things like caste and class are both rubbing up against each other, but also sometimes forcibly set aside because you have to travel in the same, train compartment, or you have to occupy the same street side, or you have to stand in lines with the same people or eat at the same place. Those things I think are very sort of both, hopeful and optimistic and liberating in some ways. That's what a city can do, and what the city represents, hopefully, maybe. It's Dr. Ambedkar's city, and he definitely hated the village because he felt like the city was where you could finally fight caste in ways that would actually lead to its disintegration. So for me, it's all of those things wrapped up in one, right? And I think that all of the different kinds of Bombay that each of the characters represent, right? The entrenched Bollywood film industry cabal, the middle class families hoping to make it in whatever they're trying to make. My favorite character, Bombaya character in this film, alongside Munna, is Motilal, he gets a brief few lines here and there. He's Millie's brother. Every time, he's asked to answer the door, he just says, "Mere paas time nahi hai, mere paas kaam nahi hai kya?" Like, he's just not interested in working, in having a goal. When Millie says, "Don't you want to," he says, "Don't you want to go to," I think he says he's studying. And when Millie says, why do you need to go to school? He says, "Mujhe तुम्हारी तरह 3 बार 10वीं में fail नहीं होना है." Like, he's just kind of this constant snarky, a very realistic counterpoint in some ways, I think, to all of the other aspirational figures there. And it's also another version of Bombay. To me, that language and the like I said, Sanjay Chhel and Neeraj Vora's dialogue really makes it come alive. For me, Bombay is, yes, the secret fourth character that nobody talks about.
Yeah, Titiksha wants to come in again. Yes, Titiksha.
Yes, I just want to piggyback on the conversation that like the cinematic grammar, like the visual grammar of the songs like Rangeela Re and like other things, they actually like like the visuals of the camera being on like on a foot level, and then like seeing it from like a very panoramic view, and like focusing on the billboards and all of those things, and her like dancing on top of buses and such vehicles. And like I think I don't remember who, but like there's some like other film scholar who also talks about such cinematic grammar in Urvashi by Prabhudeva.
Yes.
So yeah, I really, yeah, like that really
But
triggered
also,
that memory as well.
Urvashi is such a masculine song. Like,
Exactly, yeah. So
you
to have
learn about the
both
man
of them,
city. Mhm.
yes, to have both of them share that sort of like visual grammar again becomes very interesting for me there.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Also, Chennai versus Mumbai, right? Like, there's something there, or Madras versus
exactly.
Bombay, let's
Yeah.
call it what the names were at the time. I think just very fascinating. Also, I think speaking to a certain kind of gaze that was present in Tamil cinema at that time versus, versus Hindi cinema. I think it's just, as much as I love Tamil cinema for a lot of things, I don't feel like a truly big female star has emerged apart from Nayantara, right? Who is the lady superstar. But the female star making process, I think in Tamil Nadu is a lot more fraught. There are people who've written about this. Constantine Nakasis has a great paper on the absence of the Tamil heroine, I think, because all the North Indian actresses are playing Tamil characters and so on. So it's interesting to think about the legacies of female stardom and why perhaps, the visualization and the visual grammar of these songs reflects a certain, I think, orientation towards who the city belongs to, right? I do think like Tamil cinema is much more class aware, and Urvashi also represents a much more beautifully diverse sort of like, class setup where the city is accessible to more than just one group of people or middle class people. Rangeela is it plays with that constantly, and I'm interested in that as well. Yeah, but thank you for that comment. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Anyone else? Tarakeshwar?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was quite interesting. Problematizing the how do we identify the gaze and problematize the gaze in the sense that the gaze in itself is problematic, but the reception of the gaze is also important in taking a stand on the gaze. So that was quite interesting, and you used this film to elucidate that. But similarly, that is not the intention of the uh, plot of the movie, you are reading that into it. Similarly, one can also read a class into that. So you are saying that class, yeah, he is that interested in portraying the class, but it is there. One can read that into it. So what I was trying to say is that one is to look at the film and then analyze it from our theoretical background to make an argument. The other is because this is a you in your presentation you brought in actually that film is a kind of meta film. So it is also talking about star making and then all these things. So in that sense, what the plot itself says about it, without our paraphernalia, one, and then the third one is how do the people receive it? Are people again within quotes? Why I'm saying it is uh, when I watched it again yesterday and today, it did not make much sense to me. But when I watched it in 90s, mid 90s, it was quite interesting because I watched it in a suburban place, uh, which was quite outside the Hyderabad uh, town at that point of time, uh, where mainly the working class people live. And add to that, it was the second show. What is it called? Late night show. So we go there at 9 o'clock and then watch the movie. So we were studying at the university and then we went there. And it was an eye opener because when in one or two songs, the women were dancing, the working class women, and the age would be 30 to 50. Not that youngsters, college going, or school kids who are dancing to the Bollywood tunes, but it is 40 to 50-year-old women who are dancing it. And another important thing was when he realizes that the Kumar, the hero, realizes that she is not in love with him with somebody else. When that gets revealed to him, you should have seen the entire audience stood up and identified themselves with Amir Khan and shook their hand. You are not going to get her. She is ours. That kind of class identification with Amir Khan was quite astonishing. Why I'm saying it is, at the same time, we were also having debates about this beauty pageant in Bangalore. Many people were opposing it, and then some of us in Hyderabad were discussing it, and they were saying, why should we oppose it? Yeah, the concept of beauty that it deploys is problematic, but everyone should be able to come on stage and display themselves. It could be somebody who is fat, somebody who is lean. If that can also be seen as beautiful, why not? Why it should be problematic? Of course, the left also had an argument that it is capitalist venture and it's trying to expand the market and things like that. So in that sense, it fueled into the discussion of the gaze. So if I am ready to receive that gaze, then I'm going to neutralize that gaze. So in that sense, it was quite interesting for us. So one is to look at this reception, the audience, how different audience react to it and what they get out of the film, what arguments they construct for themselves. And the other is how the plot itself uh, makes an argument about certain issues because it's a meta film. And then, of course, we can also look into it with our own theoretical background and make an argument. So in that sense, it was quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those comments. I fully agree. And I also agree that I think the corrective to the male gaze is not just a female gaze, but all kinds of gazes. I think the danger is in saying that we block out a gaze or we blindfold ourselves and not gaze. That is in many ways, a muting of the senses or cutting away of our sensory apparatus, which to me defeats the whole purpose of something like film. So yeah, more gaze. Bring us feminist, queer, anti-caste, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, whatever it is. Bring them all into this, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Yagnashri, Paniraj sir, Madhurima. Anyone who wants to come in? Okay. So if there are no more comments, thank you, Pallavi, for a very, very engaging discussion and so thoroughly prepared. And we were all admiring you. Some people were having parallel chats with me here while you were presenting about how wonderfully the presentation is going. Thank you very much. And as Samartha said, if and when Geeta and I think of publishing, some of the presentations, all of which, I mean, they're so profound and give us such great insights into the films. If and when we think of publishing them, certainly we'll get back in touch with you, Pallavi.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. You all know that we meet every Saturday like this on Zoom at 9 p.m. To discuss a film. So keep in touch with TFO via WhatsApp or Facebook, whichever you're comfortable, so that you can join the discussions. Hope to see you with us night after night with one more interesting film discussion. Thank you all. Have a very good weekend and good night and good day to all those joining from different parts of the world. Bye.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
night, everyone.
Thank
See you
you.
next
Good
week.
night.